morning, beautiful people, and happy International Women's Day. The wheels do indeed keep turning. I'm so delighted to have my good friend and great love, Enroue Halfkenny, back because I think God was like, "Girl, I'm gonna get you gathered, and I'm gonna bring the brother to help you get gathered." Hey, how are you, dearest?
It's so good to see you. So good to be here. As soon as your theme song kicks in, everything just starts to move and loosen up a little bit. So I'm really glad to be back again. Right, this is in this gathering. Right, this
Yes,
day is wonderful. Thank you.
yes, yeah. I know you want to open us up with a grounding prayer
Of
of some
course,
sort because
of
I
course.
need it, and Harry is looking forward to it too.
Well, if it's good for the peoples, then then we'll do it. All right. So yeah. So as I've done before, this is a Yoruba ancestor chant. We used it to both just to sing. It's just a wonderful thing to kind of keep in our consciousness to remember, as well as when we really sit down to, as a part of our spiritual practice, maintain our relationship with them. Because in this tradition, in my tradition, as a Babalawo, um, we understand that our relationship with our ancestors continues. It's different, right? They're physically not here, but our relationship continues, and we can still access that and work with it. And that's really an indigenous perspective, and that's a perspective that many people, whether they call themselves that or not, or whether, um, plenty of Black folks would not call themselves coming, right, having some indigenous perspective, but they understand that, oh yes, I gotta honor my ancestors and where I come from, and I may even like have some photos and stuff on a mantle. So it's a part of the thing that we've been able to maintain even in the diaspora. So this chant is an honoring of them. It's saying, thank you for the ashe that you have passed down to me, right? Thank you for your blessings, your attributes, right? The things that make me me, that come from you. Thank you for those things. And not only just a thank you, but that we are using them today. So it's also a call to us to embody our own wholeness, bringing down the best things that come from our ancestors, and even healing the challenges that have also come down from them. So that's this chant. We honor our fathers, our mothers, and then all of our ancestors. Ibaba to fun wa se o. Ibaba to fun wa se. Ibaba to fun wa se o. Ibaba to fun wa se. Ashe te fuan lan lo hiyo. Ibaba to fun wa se. Ba ye to fun wa se o. Ba ye to fun wa se. Ba ye to fun wa se o. Ba ye to fun wa se. Ashe te fuan lan lo hiyo. Ba ye to fun wa se. Ba gungun to fun wa se o. Ba gungun to fun wa se. Ba gungun to fun wa se o. Ba gungun to fun wa se. Ashe te fuan lan lo hiyo. Ba gungun to fun wa se. Ba gungun to fun wa se. Ba gungun to fun wa se. Ashe.
Shay. Oh, it's been a while since I heard that.
You're just gonna have
Harry,
to learn it.
Okay.
At some point, you're just gonna have to learn it, and then you get to sing it, and you get to feel it.
All right, Harry, we gotta learn this, so we're gonna learn it. We're gonna learn it.
Uh,
All right. What's on your heart and minds today? What do you want to say what do we want to talk about today?
so we should talk about our ancestors, and specifically, like, not closing ourselves off to them because of pain that has existed in our heritage. I'm gonna put it that way. So it is not whatever that heritage is. So as African Americans, as people with mixed heritage, even as people, the very few who there are of kind of mono heritage, um, there can be pain in our ancestry. And that pain can be because of an individual, what an individual has done. It could be because of what a generation has done. It could be what was done to an individual, what was done to a generation, right? It's trauma that we can have experienced, as well as trauma that's been perpetuated, right? And human beings be what they are, it would be extremely unusual for there to be an absence of either receiving something that was traumatic or doing something that caused trauma to somebody else in our own ancestry. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of ancestors. And what this tradition says is that we can go to our ancestors for the love and care and support that we need so that our lives can be good, right? So we can have the relationships we want, the blessings we want, navigate. It doesn't control the circumstances of our lives, but it helps us to navigate the circumstances of our lives so we can really unfold whatever meaning and purpose we're here to unfold, to be whole human beings. I mean, to me, that is a worthy thing to hold as a goal or as a quest. Like, how can I be whole? How can I really be a person, right? And there's a lot of undoing because we're not raised in a society that's really about our whole personhood. It has very narrow definitions of what it means to be a good person, a successful person, a righteous person. We do these things, but if you expand that, now you're not going to get the goods. And so, but in this work, and partly because of the culture that we're in, which is very much around, right, this kind of forget who you are and where you came from and just move forward. And that is from my perspective and from traditional African perspective and indigenous perspective. I even don't like even to say African perspective because that's a whole continent, right? But from an indigenous perspective, right, from this place of being in right relationship with the earth, and all of our relatives and beings that we are connected with and our lives are intertwined with, to forget where we come from and what we've been through is really an illusion, because we actually can't. It's embedded in us genetically, physically, materially, spiritually, right? We can't actually do that, and it's a distortion of the truth. It'd be an illusion to think we could do that. But because of the pain that we've often experienced or that has existed in our heritage, many people are like, really want to avoid that. We're like, well, this person did a thing, so I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to be my own person. I'm going to free myself from that. But what that does, and what people often do, is they literally kind of cut off that part of their lineage. And so it's kind of easier to see when there's been something kind of big and traumatic. So if we look at what enslavement has done for African peoples, right? There's this a consciousness of Black Americans, which is like, where do we look to our roots and our heritage? And it's kind of ways that we've come out of the system of oppression, a system of slavery. Right? This is what is our culture based on and around, and our survival from that. And very often we've adopted the same kind of colonial and white supremacist mentality of not understanding or connecting with what also was our heritage and way of living that comes out of West Africa or Central Africa, or more newly arrived people all over the African continent. It's the no, I'm not of them. That's still those people. We've still inherited this notion of the dark continent and people being uneducated and uncivilized and has nothing to offer us. And that harms us because that actually minimizes our wholeness. Not that we have to become what that life was, but which is not possible. But part of who we are now, our wholeness, is about this, where we come from, right? That chant is, thank you for what you have given to me. in my life today. But if we are saying that we're not paying attention to that, how can we take that in? Right? How can we accept those blessings if we are the ones closing the door on that heritage? It can also happen. So as a mixed race Black person, and for many people who identify as Black who have some European heritage in them, growing up, and I think it still exists for many people, the notion in a popular way is that, oh, if you've got white in you, it's because of some like assault and rape that happened when your ancestors were enslaved, and that's just a thing to kind of cut out of your lineage and to reject. And what's challenging is that literally because of the act of maybe one person, right, if there's a sexual assault that occurred, if that's how your European heritage showed up, that's not how it primarily showed up in mine. My mom is white, so like Irish and Swedes kind of came actually through an act of love in the civil rights movement and in the kind of human rights movement of the 60s to come together in a different way. So it's not my personal narrative, though, it still could have happened with some other folks. But because of the act of one person, many people will say, I will now cut off any potential connection to that European heritage, which is both understandable and absurd. And I say absurd in the way is that, so many people, if let's say I don't have any European heritage and a grandfather of mine sexually assaulted someone in my family, and I said, oh, would I now say I'm cutting off that entire lineage that comes before him? I'm not going to embrace anything that came before him? No, people don't do that. But they do that if there's the same racial identity, people do not do that. But if it's a different racial identity, people will say, oh, I'm going to reject now this entire European heritage that may have come before this person. And that response actually comes out of white supremacy. It doesn't come out of an Africanness. It doesn't come out of an indigeneity perspective. It comes out of this notion of who is and isn't human. Who should and shouldn't kind of be at the table with you, what our own wholeness contains and doesn't contain. And through these other perspectives, there are ways to like, oh, I don't have to necessarily make peace with this person who did this violent act, but I am still made up of this lineage that came before them, which may have had nothing to do with that person's behavior. May have been just like living their lives connected to the same values that I'm connected with. And then this one person did this atrocious thing. And does it make sense for me to shut out the potential blessings or the potential recognition of what also makes me me for the sake of my notion of what I am or who I am? And in this spiritual tradition, in this spiritual practice, there are ways of, because our relationships are maintained, we can choose, just as we have with living folks, we choose what we want our relationship to be with them. There may be someone who are like, we don't want to invite you to our home. We don't want you to be a kind of a conscious part of our lives. And I'm going to move around you and still be involved in community, still be involved in even family and other relationships. And so that we can do that spiritually. But I want to name that as a part of what work can we do? The challenge is for us, right? They're like, yes, I'm accepting what comes from my ancestors. That's our challenge. They're just there. But can we have the courage and the understanding and the fortitude to say, oh, I'm going to really lean into and learn about what makes me whole. And that is an act of liberation. And that is an act of resistance. And that is a part of our resiliency to find our way to be whole, to be human beings in the face of systems that continue to dehumanize us. And even people, and sometimes people who are closest to us, that tell us that we are not enough and that we don't deserve that.
Wow. That's a thought. That is a whole mood right there. And I would imagine that is at the heart of a lot of family kind of struggle of how to make space for history and troubling history and problematic history and painful history.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not to minimize that. I mean, what I'm saying is not to minimize that at all. Is to say we are worth struggling with that. We are worth healing in a way so that we can still, it doesn't stop us from being whole, from being as free as we can possibly be.
Mm.
And these are just kind of tools of that. It's not to minimize, not say, oh no, and it's all the rainbows and the people and everything is just love and beauty. No, there's some real, there's real pain, there's real suffering, and there's real stuff to be worked out and change. And that's a possibility. How do we undo cycles of violence? How do we undo cycles of oppression that have even been within our own families, so that we can find a different kind of relationship and a different kind of support that we also have.
What makes me think about as we're talking about this is how, you know, there was a time, and I think there's a great many people who reject their Africanness. One, because, you know, we have a hard time connecting to it because we don't know exactly where in Africa we come from. I mean, we have an idea
because
of
white supremacy,
Middle Passage, and white supremacy.
Right.
So, and then so much has been ingrained in us that anything African is bad and less. Do you know what I mean? And ignorant and dirty and all these things. And so people want to get as far away from that story, that made up story, that false story as they can. And I see it. I had a conversation with somebody, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago. And I said, you know, I can't wait till I can get to go to the continent. And they were like, I'll never go to Africa. I don't know nothing about those people. I'm not one of them. I'm not from them. And I remember thinking, I was stunned because the person is somebody who I admire and who is learned, right? Learned. And I was like, and the passion in which they said that just struck me, because I was like, what the hell is this? Like, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow. So you got me thinking about the depths of which people have not embraced Blackness, that have not accepted the history of us from a African-centered perspective.
Yes. And it doesn't mean, you know, the answer is everybody going back and adopting a thing and finding a thing. To me, at the very least, and this is why, like, ancestor work to me is also super central, because we all have ancestors. And, you know, if someone is like, my ancestors don't matter and I'm cut off for them and they don't exist, whatever, like, okay, like, that's your path, right? And I'm not telling you what you need to believe, but what I'm doing is I'm offering up something that has been incredibly healing for me, and comes not just like some notion I just came up with, but actually comes from where we come from. Like, this is actually not foreign, and this is something that has actually been systematically taken and beaten out of us and then switched with a whole different worldview of something. And so everyone gets to choose where along that is. Like, we're all in the same soup. We're all in the same stuff, and you know, how we make peace with that and find our way in that is our own journey. But for me, it's important to really look at, like, let me be really honest about who I am and where I come from, not just to know it, but actually as a way to, like, give me some rootedness in a way of being that this popular culture does not provide for me. Right? And is not designed to. And people talk about a broken system. It's like, no, this system, right? There's this, you know, and I even, like, in terms of language, I want to start using, instead of like, well, here's this white supremacy system. It's a myth. It's a system built on the myth of white supremacy. And this notion of, like, race and differences that is all a part of that. And it's actually created to serve this myth and this system based on this myth of white supremacy, and pulls us out of being people. Yes, all of these identifiers are very important. And if we get lost in them, we are constrained by the language and the structures of this system, versus, like, oh, there are actually ways that we have lived and existed in the world, completely different, where we found our personhood, which we can still be connected to, even as the circumstances are still what they are, right? I can believe what I want, and I can walk out the door and like this, oh, look, it's the same system as it was yesterday, right? Regardless of how grounded or connected, or open or closed or at peace or completely stressed out I am, right? There's this circumstance and these conditions that I'm still living in.
So, Enroue, when you were making your spiritual journey, and you stepped into the faith that you are, that you live in, did it feel like a piece was missing? Did you feel like, did you have a sense that, oh, this was a part of a piece that was missing from my being, and I feel at home?
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. So it actually flipped around the other way. It was, I was at the bottom of my bottom. And it was literally like, oh, kind of touching upon or something being, it wasn't like my own doing, but kind of seeing, it's like everything being dark and like all of a sudden there's this spark. And I'm like, what's that? I didn't know that was there. And so here I am in like the bottom of my bottom in terms of like mental health crisis and depression and feeling suicidal, trying to kill myself, either directly or indirectly, panic attacks, all the while I'm in an undergraduate in Middlebury College, right? And like I'm trying to live my life, but it's a crazy place, and feeling that real despair and like, wow, life is really not relevant for me. And kind of out of that, something showed up that was like, there's something here that you are not connected to and you don't know about. And I really thought, I was smart. I understood all kinds of things about systems and oppression and creativity. I'm living my life. I know this, and this is why they do things. And I'm understanding people. And here was a thing that I was like, oh, I don't know what that is. And it touched me in a way that was like, I can't write off living and what this life has for me if I don't know what that is. Because if I'm saying like this is a waste of time and useless and I'm hopeless and nothing is here, that means I have exhausted everything that's here. And so for something to show up and say like, whoop, here's a little something, I was like, all right, let me see. I can always come back to this place, right? We always have the power to end our lives. Not that that's a good thing, but like we have that. And so I literally knew in that moment, like, so am I going to live or am I going to die? Kind of at my own hands. And so I said, okay, well, I'm going to live. And that was a real concrete choice kind of after having that experience. And then the question was, well, am I going to be sane or am I going to be crazy? Right? Am I going to like live in this? 'Cause I was using a lot of drugs. I was like, am I going to live in some like, institution where I'm like living in my brain and consciousness and fantasy world and folks are just like taking care of my body, or am I going to like be sane? And so I said, well, if this thing is a thing, I really need to be connected to it. So I need to be sane. I didn't even know what that meant, right? I wasn't necessarily living sanely before that. And so from that moment, the decision making kind of followed that kind of just that route. Okay, so is this leading to my being able to be present? Oh, that means I got to deal with some emotional things that I never dealt with. Oh, that means I got to deal with some addiction things that I've never dealt with. I got to deal with some relationship things I never dealt with. Not all at once, but like bit by bit by bit by bit. And then, because I need to get my feet on the ground, because things were just too overwhelming. And even things spiritually that was happening to me, and they felt different from things that would happen to me when I was intoxicated. I was like, I don't have any language for that. I don't know where that fits. I'm in a place where if I start talking about these things, people are just going to say I'm crazy. The power of dreams, hearing things or feeling things. I had no structure or place for that. But I also knew that like I can't deal with that until I get my feet on the ground, until I get functional, where I can like go to the dining hall and not have a panic attack, where I can like go out over here and just not be freaked out, or like get some regular sleep and like take a shower every day and like do the regular living things that we just need to do. And so I spent a lot of time kind of doing the kind of functional things, seeing a therapist. There's some things I got to work out, getting some 12-step programs, some 12-step meetings. Adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families was a really important, crucial piece to undo the ways that I had learned to take on certain roles in my life, to navigate some dysfunctional family dynamics. I was like, oh, I got to like undo that, because I can't find myself, because the way that I was living, I wasn't really connected to myself. It was like mask layer upon mask layer upon mask layer of how to navigate my feelings with this world that sort of seemed related, but didn't really. Am I seeing myself really reflected around me? Not just in terms of like race, but just in terms of like how I'm trying to live and exist. And like, I didn't have an understanding of that. And it was much easier for me to hide who I was. And so again, if I was going to live and be sane and like really be present and understand what this life is, I need to deal with it. I need to find out, who am I in all of this? At least start on that path. And then it became, when I got functional enough, okay, this spiritual stuff that was going on, what is that? Where do I find that? And for me, the places that I felt most, I'll say, at home was when I was by myself in nature. And it was the only place that I wasn't constantly focused or having to hold an attention with like, how am I seen? How do I see other people? How do I think how I am? Is this really who I am? Am I showing up here? Or how do they see me? And do I have to adjust this to show up here, fit in here? Or am I now a counter to that? Like, all of that chatter, which had guided me for a long time, was gone. Like, this tree doesn't care. That bird going by, like, if I'm sitting, it's not like, oh, whoop, I'm a person. And so it's the only place that actually allowed me to touch upon both me being a person, but also embedded in something that was so much greater than me. And I couldn't like manipulate it or con it. Like, I mean, I can, for a whole host of reasons, presenting myself certain ways, or you present yourself a certain way, and, oh, I'm this kind of upstanding person. And I could also get away with a lot because like people wouldn't expect, teachers or folks wouldn't expect me to like fake a note or lie or skip a thing, and I would like tell a story. And so I learned how to like do some manipulating to really hide, right? I use sarcasm to hide. And in nature, not only was that not necessary, but like I couldn't use those tools. And it was this system that was so much bigger than me. There was things going on that was completely unrelated to me, didn't care about me, wasn't a thing. And so that became a place of like, so here, there's something, and that was like the closest and the kind of beginning of my really experience of the divine. And what was important was then the experience of it. Like, so as I began to seek what are the traditions that resonate with me, I actually started with Christianity. I got a whole lot of folks in my family and in my ancestry who are very much not just in the church, but in leadership positions in the church and in various churches on both sides of my family. So I started, I was like reading the Bible and let me just read it and let me learn some things. And it did not speak to me in that same way. I was like, well, maybe it's the Quran. I'll read some of that. And like that, I'd spent even shorter amount of time on that. And at the time, I had dreads, which is the exact opposite of what I have now. And even like looking into like Rastafari was something that touched me, mostly because of its connection to the earth, but not so much connection through kind of King James Bible and that sacred text there. And so it kept finding myself, there's this experiential connection with the divine that I'm finding through nature, where I get to just rest and be me and connected to something that is so much greater than me. And so I began to look at what are the traditions on the planet that do that. And if you do that, you quickly understand that like, well, that's just every single indigenous tradition on the planet. That's these people over here connected to the earth, those people over there. And everybody had that. people of African heritage, people of European heritage, people of Asian heritage, people not even what we want to name as those heritages. Like there's traditions of people in relationship with the earth in an experiential way, not just with the earth, but with the divine that is and of and is beyond what is in nature and that. And so I said, well, if I just look at everybody on the planet, that's too big. So let me start with my own ancestry. It also hooks into, I was raised just like everybody else here in this culture of consumerism where we can just pick and choose and take a thing. And so I was like, ooh, I didn't want to then say, oh, that tradition, indigenous Samoan tradition, I'm going to go there and like start doing those practices, right? Because is just colonization and consumerism speaking. So I said, let me start with my own people. And so I looked at that, like, what are the indigenous, like, kind of pre-Christian Swedes and like kind of Sami traditions that still exist as a part of that? What are the kind of Irish roots? Because that's also part of my heritage. And then, here are these indigenous Mi'kmaq and Cherokee, and like, what did those people do? And then like kind of quote African, that's like a big thing. How do I even sort that out? What's happening in West Africa? And just starting to open myself up to those things. And it wasn't until I literally had a conversation with my dad, and he was like, oh, you should talk to your cousin. And it turned out, which I had never known, that a cousin of mine and her partner were priestesses in the Orisha tradition in Boston, where I was living, had a spiritual house. And so I just started talking to them and visiting and learning. And then there was something in that, because what I realized I needed a practice, right? Like what I said before in terms of like growing up in this culture, I said, well, I need a practice and I actually need a tradition, because how else will I know that I'm not just making something up because it just feels good? Like, oh, and I'm going to go in the woods and I'm going to build a thing over here and that feels good. So I guess that's it, right? And I know myself, right? And I said, that may be fine. And I'll get to a point and be like, well, how do I know I'm not just creating a nice picture that I just want a story that I just want to do? And knowing that I wasn't the first human being to desire this and to seek this. So I said, let me look at what are the traditions that have been going on that I can learn. And, I went through a period of like talking to folks, and I did like this shamanic workshop, and there were some good things about that, some horrific, uncomfortable things about it. But it was kind of orienting and finding a way of how do I, it's like walking around and you smell something that smells good, and you have to like follow that scent to where it is. And you don't know, right? And you're at a place you don't know. So that was the seeking of like, does this resonate? Oh, that gets at it a little bit. Oh, but not quite. Let me move over here. That touches something, right? There's some spirit in that, but like, it's like not the right language, or there's something a little not enough in it. Because that was really the calling, right? The call of what was like, you want to find where the meaning is, where the purpose is, where that connection is in this life. That's the thing to follow. And that's been the thing that hasn't been follow because I do these meditations or these practices and I feel so relaxed and it just brings me peace, right? Facing yourself is very uncomfortable, right?
It is
very uncomfortable.
It is.
But it has meant that there's a thing that I can actually lean on and rely on. So just like I'm talking about this ancestor work, yes, here's this pain over here, but you got all of this to lean on for support to deal with that pain, right? And the reason you deal with it is because it's actually in your way of being a whole person. And so, in the early 90s, I came across this tradition, this Orisha tradition, and have been a practitioner, and then studied and training. And then I did initiation and ceremony in Nigeria in 2000. And then I kind of became and learned to be a babalawo, be a priest in this tradition. And that has gone from being a real personal thing around like my personal practice to being something that is about, here I am on your show talking about it, right? And working with people about what this practice means for them and what it can mean for them. Whether it's just learning how to work with their ancestors differently, or whether it's like learning that chant that I sang that I did earlier, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of my spiritual journey, it is no done. It is evolving and growing and opening, and I'm being challenged and have to face some things. But now because I've been doing this for a while, it's easier to trust the not knowing, right? It's like, oh, my smell is going that way. Oh, but I haven't been there, and it doesn't look like the kind of place that would hold it. But I trust this smell. I trust this connection to take a step in a direction that feels scary or unorthodox or just uncomfortable or whatever it is, right? And that's kind of where even things are at now, as I've left my therapy practice and closed that down, and this kind of opening into this other way of being and this other kind of not just work, but actually orienting much more around a way of being versus this is the next thing I have to do, and which is also what is part of this connection and guidance and tradition.
I love when you tell the story of your journey, because I want people to understand that it is a journey, that you didn't just wake up one day and be like, oh, I know what it is. Like, it took a period of time. And I think that's the part that people get discouraged by, that they think I'm gonna try this on and and this is it. And even though they know it's not it, but they're like, if I just keep throwing myself into it,
right.
that it's gonna work. It's like, you gotta take the walk. You gotta take the walk. And that's the part that scares people. It's the actual walk of looking at yourself, facing yourself, doing that internal work, and then following what you said, that smell, right? Just, and being comfortable and trusting that you could follow it.
Because I know that I'm not alone. And so part of the fundamental shift was, right, in this place of despair was like, I'm alone, right? I got, even, like, the people who love me, it's like, yeah, you love me, but you don't really know, right, the pain I feel. And that real sense, like, that was the place of despair, right? And disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in this, so I'll give this concrete example of, like, even how, like, this ancestor work, two ways that it's shifted. Well, maybe I'll just do the first. So on my dad's side, there's, let's see, my great grandfather was abusive to his family. They were originally, these are black folks originally, so black folks who come from Nova Scotia, but before they had come from the Caribbean. So a lot of generations of black people in Nova Scotia. Halfkennys are part of that. That's where the Halfkenny name comes out of. And my great grandfather was abusive to his wife, my great grandmother, as well as my grandfather and the rest of his siblings. And he was the eldest. And that led to my grandfather learning how to fight to protect his family from his father. So both officially as a boxer, but then he also then made money as a street fighter. This is long before Fight Club, as a street fighter, to make money for his family, in addition to work in the trades, and also in shipyards. So he then vowed not to abuse his wife or his kids because of what happened to him. Now, there's also this other thread of alcoholism that runs in there that has its own impact, right? Because people actually don't find ways of dealing with what's the suffering that's going on, right? And so it comes out in all these other ways. So, like, alcoholism is certainly this core element of a thread that also needed to be undone. So though my grandfather wasn't physically abusing my grandmother or my dad, my uncle and aunt, he would still use violence as an outlet. So, like, he would get fed up and then he would, like, go out in the street, just walk into a neighborhood he shouldn't be in and get in a fight and wreck people because he knew how to fight. But that was an outlet that he had. My father also, I'm not going to do that, was the first person to really, after my parents split up, to get sober. And so that had a transformative impact on him and on the family and the kind of family network of, like, oh, this is also this piece that has accompanied this kind of pain and trauma. And so while he didn't get physically abused by his dad, there was distancing, there was kind of other kinds of abuse that happened. And then I had my own struggles, right? So I didn't really learn from that, and, like, still had my own, mostly drug addiction with psychedelics and weed. But also some alcohol thrown in because that was more common. And so that became a part of my own healing and undoing, as well as then as a parent looking at like, ooh, so my dad wouldn't hit me, but he would certainly give us the look, right? And everyone knows about the look. And then as a parent, I was like, well, I'm not going to hit anybody, but I'll give the look. Until I got the message really from my daughter, how scared she was of me because of that. And so I then had to say, like, so am I going to perpetuate a continued use of violence and power over, or the threat of violence, to parent? And so then I had to make some decision to undo that and to not do that and to find some other strategies. Now, where this comes in terms of ancestor work is that even though my grandfather wasn't physically abusive to my dad, I saw the impact of his behavior had on him, and then the way that he couldn't show up for me as a father. And so he passed away in the late 80s, and I hadn't come into this tradition yet. And when I did, and I was able to, had an ancestor altar and honoring space set up for them, I was able to express to him, write letters and talk about how angry I was at him, at what he had done that still perpetuated these cycles of disconnection and a difficulty in expressing love, as well as kind of a different kind of violence, as well as these things around addiction. And so I was able to work out in a relationship with him, with my grandfather, those feelings over time, to an extent that, there wasn't the forgiveness was a different thing, or the coming to peace with or terms with was a different thing. It was like, okay, I can love him and I can receive his love, and I can see where the pain has come from, right? It wasn't just someone who just decided and woke up one day like, I'm just going to be an ass and I'm just going to cause pain. It was, oh, I'm hurting, and I have very few tools to deal with that hurting. And so in this ancestor work, a real process of coming to terms with that pain, of feeling it in me, of facing it in me, and then also in a relationship, I'm going to work this out in my relationship with you, my grandfather who has passed away, to find some peace, to find some ways that I can hold you in my heart and face the complexity, as opposed to like, I'm just not going to look at that and I'll just keep you over here and do the thing. And so that's a part of that work of relationship, right? If you think about like relationships, here we have relationships that matter and that can help us to not just not feel alone, but to not be alone in this, because we're not.
Wow. Oh my God, this is so good. We have to go, because I know Harry's like, if you don't get off this air. Oh my God, that was so good, Enroue. And I know that there are people out there that heard that and will understand, and this will resonate with, that there is some work to be done, and that you can do ancestor work without your ancestors being physically present.
Yeah.
That.
And you can do it without just opening the floodgates to all the pain.
Right. Right.
Just like you don't just open your door and just say, everybody just come in. Come into my room.
No. And it can start with something as easy and simple as writing a letter. Here's the one person I can trust. Let me just connect with them. Yeah. And they can help and support you to connect somewhere else. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Babz. You'll be back though. Everybody, because everybody's texting me. He'll be back. We'll talk some more. Folks can reach out if they have some specific questions. So you can email me, Enroue, ENROUE, at healingandliberation.com. Feel free, or get a hold of Babz. Babz knows how to get a hold of me. I'll be teaching her that chant soon. Oh, I know. Harry and I are going to learn this thing. I am. I love it. Thank you so much, Enroue. It's such a pleasure. I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is always to have you here. it's so good. I love it too. All right, y'all. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Y'all take this and do what you will with it. Lots of love to you all. Stay well. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Enroue. Thanks, man.